Merhaba loud. So we all have books that we wish we would have read sooner, at a younger age, particularly because the way the book taught us to do something helped us, or you read some piece of information that changed the way you view things, right? And I have a few books like that, books that I wish I would have read sooner. The first book is The Longevity Diet by Walter Longo. Walter Longo is into like this whole anti-aging community, and he thinks that the best way to approach anti-aging right now is through diet, because when you look at some of the blue zone things, but also he likes some of the research on fasting and the benefits of fasting. And as a result of that, I've introduced fasts into my life, and I found the fasts have been pretty beneficial. Like when I want to have a really productive day, I deliberately fast, and I feel more mentally alert. I don't feel sluggish. I don't feel cloggy or like lethargic. I don't feel like this when I fast and I'm working. So because of this book, I've learned how to do fasting in a more intelligent way, in a way that won't damage my body or bring my body weight too low. And yeah, it's benefited my life overall. The other one is the Blue Zone solution, kind of related to the first one. This one changed the foods I eat. I used to be more okay with eating meat before this book, but after finding out that the people in the blue zones don't really eat meat that much until they get into their like 60s and 70s when they need more protein, I decided to just go to like a full like vegetarian diet for the most part. I'll eat eggs maybe every once in a while, and this book really did that for me. After seeing like the actual matters of fact with blue zone people, I mean obviously blue zone people might have like really rare genetics, but their diets are mostly veggies. So for that reason, I decided just to mimic this. He has this really good pragmatic sentiment in this book where, sure, we don't know the causes, but I'm gonna mimic what's there as close as possible because I think that's my best bet. Even though he doesn't know what the cause is for these people who live to 100, right? Another one is The Psychology of Persuasion. This book I wish I would have read maybe at like 16, because it really is true that humans, if you've read Thinking Fast and Slow, we use like heuristics, and there's a lot of ways to hijack those heuristics to persuade people. The one story that always sticks with me here is he had a saleswoman come to his door, and the saleswoman was dressed very like nicely, and she started the conversation by asking him about like if he goes out and spends a lot of time like going to restaurants, and do you, I don't know, go to movies and stuff like this, like are you basically a socialite, are you like a social bug? And of course he wanted to answer yes, right? And after answering yes to all these questions, she then like tried to sell him on some things that he said yes to. So she kind of got him to commit to something by trying to make him look more prestigious than he actually is, right? Because if you say no to these questions, you sound like a shut-in. And then he felt like he was obliged to buy what she was selling because he said yes to all these questions and didn't want to seem like a liar and yada yada yada. So like this book goes over all these kinds of small persuasion tricks that can be used, and if I would have known some of these persuasion tricks earlier in my life, I definitely would have used some of them. Next one is Alan Watts' Become What You Are. To be honest, it's not just Alan Watts, like this specific book that I'm talking about. I wish I would have studied Alan Watts maybe when I was even 14 or 13, because a lot of the ideas in here are super good. Like I think there's one idea here where basically you shouldn't focus on the future and you shouldn't focus on the past. You should just enjoy what you have now. There's one thought experiment where he gives like, if you could dream like any dream in the world and you had like infinite amounts of time to make dreams, at some point in time you would eventually dream the current experiences you're having now, so therefore you should enjoy what you're having now. Kind of like teaching Eastern thought to Western people like myself. And so for that reason, I wish I would have came across Alan Watts much sooner, because a lot of Eastern thinkers don't tell the stories in such a like practical sense, I guess. He doesn't bury it in like metaphysics, basically, whereas a lot of other Eastern thinkers will bury it in metaphysics, and they're very, very religious about it, you could say, whereas he thinks it's just like self-help, which I think is like the beneficial approach for the most part. The next book is a history of the modern Middle East. There's a new edition of this book. I strongly recommend you read it. I'll probably read not the current new edition, but the next edition after that. Yeah, I wish I would have read this book because growing up in the West, I was fed so many lies in the media, and I knew nothing about the actual region. And then when I started to read about the region, I realized how much more nuanced and messy everything is. And I developed more sophisticated understandings of these countries and how they relate to politics back in the West. You can very easily be misled about what goes on in this region, and so I strongly recommend reading something about the region, especially like a systematic general history of all the countries here. Yeah, this book really changed my view on things. The next one is Leonardo da Vinci, the Walter Isaacson biography. I wish I would have read this one earlier, simply for the fact that Leonardo was a lazy bum. What this basically proved to me was that you could still do a lot of good things without being a workaholic, right? Now, if Leonardo was a workaholic, it could have been the case that there would have been more works produced, right? Or it could have been the case that the current works that he did produce would have been extremely mediocre, right? There is something to be said for having long gaps of time between doing things. But yeah, when I first got to university, I was of the opinion that I should sleep 6 hours a night, and I should, study like 5 or 6 hours a day, and do extracurricular things on the side, like write essays or write books, or find a job that could help my future career where I wanted to work. But after reading about Leonardo's laziness, I realized, okay, well, you could still do great things without being a workaholic, so maybe I can take the 8 hours of sleep or 7 hours of sleep. And I still believe that, and I hear a lot of times like these motivational speakers in the West, like Goggins or whatever, talk about like don't sleep as much, or like work harder. But I think if you work 6 or 8 hours a day, like not just showing up to work for 6 or 8 hours, but actually working 6 or 8 hours a day, that's enough. Like you don't need to do 16-hour days, and there isn't any evidence to show that like a 16-hour day you're going to work any better than if someone who worked like an 8-hour day. So yeah, I wish I would have read this sooner. Probably could have got some more sleep. The last book is Making China Modern, from the great Qing to Jinping. I don't know how to say his name. I wish I read this book sooner because I didn't know much about China's history, and now that I have read this book, it recontextualizes the policies that they make and like the decisions they make. I can understand why they're perhaps not so happy with Europeans, especially the British, because the British burnt down the Summer Palace, which was, everybody who went there, at least what they wrote about it, was like the greatest piece of architecture they've ever seen. And they burnt it down. The British burnt it down. The French said they weren't going to burn it down because it was an insult to culture to burn it down. And for example, there was a diplomat who was going to all the opium ports and saying to the British traders who were importing the opium, like, hey, you don't even sell this in the UK, so why would you sell it to foreigners? Like, why would you sell it to Chinese people? And rather than like responding to that, the guy just said, I don't care. If you stop us from trading opium, we're going to go to war. And that's kind of what happened. They went to war over the opium, and they wanted to sell. And it wasn't like a unilateral decision. I think it was a vote, and it was a close vote, basically a split back at the UK, where half of them wanted to go to war to trade opium with China. So yeah, there was a lot of damage done to China from foreigners, and also there was a lot of damage done to China from the Qing Empire. Qing, I think I'm saying it right. I want to read more about these guys, the Qing Dynasty, because they made some pretty poor decisions that impacted China really negatively as well. So yeah, this book was great for understanding the history of China, and it really reshaped how I think about China. I have a more dynamic understanding of the country now. So those are some books that I wish I would have read earlier, because they would have changed my mind or changed how I do things. But with that being said, gule gule.